So let's get into this topic. First of all, what's Mashiach going to be like? The Rambam tells us at the end of Hilchos Melachim, the end of the Laws of Kings, literally the last 2 chapters are dedicated to this. And he says there's very little that we can know about what it's going to be like at the end of history, how it's going to be. We have lots of prophecies about it, so we can say certain things, but exactly what the prophecies mean cannot be 100% clear. So for example, it tells us the wolf will lie down with the lamb. So you've got Yeshayahu, Isaiah in chapters 2, 11, right? These are very clear prophecies that certain things, there'll be world peace. There will be all the nations of the world come together to Jerusalem, to God's mountain, to serve Hashem together. A few things like that are very clear. When it says the wolf will lie down with the lamb, that obviously means there'll be world peace. We can say that. But does it mean more than that? Does it have a literal, will there be some kind of miraculous new world in which wolves don't kill lambs anymore? That we don't know. We know that what was obvious in context, the most obvious level of the prophecy we know. But the micro details of it, exactly what it's going to be like, we do not know. Okay, that the Rambam says. In other words, there's many, again, the minimal is world peace, that's black and white. Minimal is the nations of the world coming to Jerusalem. Minimal is an anointed descendant of David, be back on the throne, linking the Jewish people together as one, bringing the whole world together, right? Temple being rebuilt. Those things we know. Everything beyond that, says the Rambam, we don't know. Because even when the prophets saw visions, like in Zechariah and in, let's say, I don't know, all of the different prophecies, Yechezkel, the last chapters of Yechezkel, right? All this vision, it's very hard to know when a prophet sees something exactly how to understand what they're seeing. And the Rambam goes so far as to say because the Messianic era will have such revelation of God, even if you could see a vision of it, you wouldn't understand it or wouldn't know how to translate it into language that anyone else could understand. Now, there's 2 problems. One is, if you saw it, you may not even know what you're seeing. And 2 is, even if you did, when you try to use words, people won't be able to connect to it or relate to it. Yeah?
But would it be a visibly supernatural thing?
Great question. So this is a debate already back in the Gemara. Will the Messianic era come supernaturally or naturally? Now, you should know that there is a difference between the way Maimonides, the Rambam, and actually others like some of the Gaonim and some of the other medieval commentators, other Rishonim, think about the Messianic era and the world to come, versus how, let's say, Nachmanides and the traditional Kabbalistic world, broadly speaking, view them. I'm going to go through the form. The Rambam sees the end of history as a Messianic era, but the world to come is really a non-embodied state. Okay? The Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, they see, no, the end of history, the Messianic era, leads to the real end of history, which is the world to come. The world to come is after the Messianic era. The Messianic era is like a corridor to the world to come, and that's how they line up all the prophecies. Some that sound more miraculous are talking post-Messianic, the world as it will be, the return to the state of the Garden of Eden. And that world, right, and that's where the world to come is. That's where judgment is. And there will be some level of body still in that state. We might not be as bodily conscious as we are now, as bodily focused as we are now, but there will be some embodiment, some physicalness to it. So there is a debate about it. And the Rambam, Maimonides, brings Shmuel. He brings the view in the Talmud, in the Gemara, that says, Ein Beini Moshe Mashiach. There's no difference in the Messianic era and our time except Shibud Malchias Bilvad, except for basically political independence. By which he means, because he defines it, the Jewish king who, the Jews are back in the land of Israel, there's Jewish sovereignty, there's Jewish safety, security, the temple is rebuilt, all the nations, there's peace in the world, all the nations come to God. That's the kind of what it is. And beyond that, we don't know what the prophecies mean. Even the prophets themselves didn't necessarily know fully what it means, and we'll have to wait and see. That's the Rambam's view, yeah.
Did the Nevi'im know that these prophecies weren't happening that soon?
It's a good question. It's hard to know how long in the future they thought it was. As a general rule, this is a very good, if you ever learn the Nevi'im, if you ever learn any prophetic text, you need to know a few rules. One is that ignore the chapters. The chapters are not native to the text. They were imposed by Christians later on. Sometimes they track natural fault lines in the text very well, sometimes not so well. But the best divisions are the actual textual divisions, where there's a gap in the text called a parasha. And you will often see a Navi have 4 of them in a row. Let's say about Isaiah, Yeshayahu will have a vision about Egypt. And he has a whole series of visions that are not necessarily all going to happen at the same time. Right? So he'll see Nebuchadnezzar attacking Egypt, and then he'll see Egypt getting eventually crushed, and then he'll see the Nile rerouting, and then he'll see, not necessarily in this order, Egypt turning to one God. Right, so these are, we know, first of all, they are in different sections, which means they're actually different visions. And second of all, we know historically they all came true, but not necessarily in the same time. Nebuchadnezzar attacked Egypt and raided it. We know that later on there was a shift in the Nile. We know that which caused a lot of destruction on the old, where the river had been. We know that Egypt eventually became monotheistic, right? It had a wave of Christianity and a wave of Islam. So we know all these things. So they're not necessarily in one go. Yes. Now, so you will sometimes get, let's say, especially in Yeshayahu, visions of things like a short-term salvation. The town is under siege and it's going to be saved. But then he has more visions and more visions that sound messianic already. And again, he can see the bits of the history of what will happen to the Jewish people. They're not necessarily a single event. But whether he personally then believed, they're all going to happen in the next few years or not, that's hard to know. We don't know that from the text itself. It's possible he did or possibly didn't, but his visions are all true. Okay, so that's very important to know. Now, so getting back to this, here's one way to think about it, given what we're looking at right now. So this debate, will the Messianic era be miraculous? Will it be natural? In the 1970s, there was a very prolific writer, 1980s, called Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. A lot of his books are still on the shelves here and all over bookshops. He wrote before there was internet, easy to research, and he was a Baal Tshuva. When he was young, he was on America's Who's Who of Physicists or something, and then he became a religious Jew. He was obviously a brilliant mind, an amazing memory, and he was able to write an enormous amount of books. I think he died in his early 40s, I believe, very young. But he wrote an immense amount of books, and the footnotes on some of them are absolutely incredible. And he's got, Handbook of Jewish Faith and a few other things. And he proposed an idea. I don't know if he was the first to think about it, that maybe both sides are true. Maybe the view, both sides of, is the Messianic era world to come going to be miraculous, or is it going to be natural? And he wanted to say it could be they're both right, and technology might be the bridge. This is a speculative idea, but the longer history's moved on since then, the more it looks plausible. What's the idea? The idea is that you can have miraculous outcomes with non-miraculous inputs. So I'm telling you 2,000 years ago, when by the time of the Messianic era, you'll be able to hold in your hand the other side of the world, or something. Let's say I said that, right? So you'd say, that's a miracle. That can't be, I can look at my hand and see the other side of the world. But now we can see it as natural. So is it miracle or is it natural? It's a miracle relative to, right? It's a miracle delivered through nature. It's something that was impossible, that by grabbing the muds and metals of the earth and reconfiguring them together with electromagnetic radiation, it can actually happen. So in other words, the prophets see things that, given what they were in their time, could not naturally happen, and yet they can naturally happen. They also tell us it will happen naturally, and they can both come true. I'll give a few examples of where this might be. This is speculative at this point, by the way. You can take all of this with a pinch of salt, but just might help us conceive of some of the things that I've been talking about. Before I get into technology, so let me just line up the eras, though. When we talk about, let's go with the Ramban's approach, right? So first you have a Messianic era, and the goal of the Messianic era is the leader of the Jewish people, the king, whose job, by the way, a king in the Davidic line is not meant to just be a political ruler with power. What they're meant to be is somebody who integrates the nation into one. Okay? I don't know if how familiar you are with this, but throughout the world of science, really, in the last, let me just see something. When are we officially meant to start and finish? I just got to get the times right. Yeah, I just got to think how much time.
9:20 to 9:45.
Perfect. I was told 9:50. Is it 45 or 50? Okay, we'll see how we do. Okay, so in the natural world, when things come together, they produce new properties that are almost miraculous compared to what there was before. So, for example, if you just studied atoms, you'd never realize that, and you only knew about atoms, you wouldn't realize if you put them together, you could produce molecules and get chemistry. And if all you knew about was molecules and molecular chemistry, you would never guess if you put enough of them together in the right structure, you get a living cell that can breathe, eat, reproduce, excrete, do all the... And if you only studied single cellular organisms, you would never guess that if you put a few trillion of them together with the same DNA operating together, all given specialist roles, you could get a human being that's conscious, that is even conscious that it's conscious, that is able to understand the mathematics of the entire universe, that's able to relate the idea of God, a creator, moral purpose. You'd never guess that. So now the Messianic idea is that we've got one more level of organization to come. First the Jewish people and Israel, and ultimately all of mankind come back together into some super oneness, that it's the reconstruction of the soul of Adam in the Garden of Eden. Okay? So the Messianic king begins to integrate the nation and ultimately the whole world, builds the house of God for all of mankind, and the whole world comes together in peace. That's what the Messianic king achieves. At some point that evolves into and develops into the world to come, when we are fully transcendent, fully have this super conscious state, like one gigantic soul, vastly more powerful than any of us can be right now. And that state is Mala Aretz Deus Hashem, the world is full of the knowledge of God and completely connected to God, and that's the world to come, and not everyone can make it into that world. Not every consciousness can survive in a level of closeness to God. If it lived a life that brought that godliness into the world, it will live there happily, more than happily, beyond anything we can conceive. And if it didn't, then it can't exist in that state of super consciousness. So that's what's going on. Now, Rabbi Kaplan's point is that it could be that technology will help build the vessels that can do this. So I'll give some examples. We know the Gemara tells us that one of the things will happen in the end is a sidin chaza, right? The chaza, treif meat, pig meat, can become kosher. Now, presumably what the Gemara means is things that will eventually become allowed that were not allowed. But you and I can see that somewhere in the next few years, that will also come literally true, right? We know once you've got, let's say, 3D printed meat that isn't coming originally from a pig, the fact that it's got the same texture or composition, chemical composition as something that came from a pig, it'll be completely kosher. Well, the rabbis will say shouldn't have it for other reasons, but in principle, that's just a small example of something that can come literally true. Now let's start to think about more sophisticated examples. Could we imagine that we're going to get to the point where human beings don't die? That's not a crazy thing anymore. We may already be humans for whom natural death no longer happens, right? Natural death is a genetic phenomenon. It's about how many times a cell can replicate itself. At some point you'll be able to twiddle with genes, not too far in the future. Will it be in our lifetime, our children's lifetime? It's not going to be very far off in the future. So what about the ability to have the wolf lie down with the lamb? So you realize something very interesting, that very soon we're going to have lab-produced meat, like I said before, that will be as affordable, nutritious, and taste as good as real animal meat. At that point, every country on earth will legalize killing animals. Why would you kill an animal when you can get exactly the same thing without killing it? Eventually you get even better, you get even cheaper, even better, So why would you do it? So obviously that will become illegal. And then what will happen at some point, very likely, whether it'll be 10 years later or 200 years later, at some point humans will surely turn around and start getting very revolted by the idea of animals killing each other. It's one thing while we're still killing them. When we stop doing that, we're going to start thinking, why should it be that a zebra in Africa gets hunted by a dog that rips its stomach open? And we'll be able to solve it at some point. We'll be able to put an intravenous patch on every African hunting dog and every predator, have a drone fly in every day and feed them. So just these sorts of things, which we today are just like these metaphors, we can see how they could come literally true. We can't yet see how the dead will be resurrected, because given our current vision of science, we don't have a way to do it. But it's not crazy to imagine. Let's go to the next stage before then. Is it crazy to imagine we could produce a mind between us? We're seeing chips in the brain is very likely to become quite real relatively soon. What happens when lots of people have chips? Could you create a shared mind? It's not impossible to imagine that. Could you create a mind that is the whole of Klal Yisrael as a single mind that we're all a part of? Could you create a mind that is the whole of humanity as a single mind eventually that we're all a part? These things are not as crazy as they once sounded. Will that be miracle? Will that be natural? It could be both. right? So you start to think, and when we're able to see the world of physics from a completely different perspective and see into its past and future, we'll be able to bring those who've died back into that consciousness. And suddenly all of this stuff, it might not all be technologies that exist now. It could be that Hashem is giving us the kalim, the vessels, to prepare for all this to happen. But going back over the questions that we were given, so that I think is that when we ask, what was the exact wording of that first question? What will it look like? Now, will we still have davening? Will humans still have free will? So the general understanding is as follows. Yes, in the beginning of the era, we will have prayer still. It may not be exactly the same as our current prayer. Once the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, it could be some of the prayers that we do will change. Obviously, we won't be davening for the rebuilding of the temple once it's rebuilt. We won't necessarily have to pray for a lot of these things once they've come true. But there will still be prayer because Adam in the Garden of Eden was meant to pray. L'avdo l'shomra, he was meant to work the garden and guard it. And working it meant some kind of prayer, some kind of... Remember what prayer will probably be is, I want to get closer to you, God. Right? I want to get closer to you, God. And, right, that will still be. So in early eras, there will still be prayer. There will be people living and dying, so we'll be praying for their health. There'll be lots of things we still want to pray for. As more and more of these blessings get fulfilled, we'll probably do less and less praying about them. And our prayers will shift to deeper things. Will there still be free will? This already we see more controversy over. Obviously, the more God gets revealed in the world, the less free will we have. Eventually, when we hit the level called the world to come, there will be no more free will. I think the Maharal says in the Messianic era, we'll have the free will to complete processes that we began. And by the world to come, there'll be no more free will. The world to come is the state God envisioned for the world, the state where God's light shines everywhere and where all of us are full of the light of God. The difference is, had he created us that way in the beginning, we would not have existed. Because you can also imagine beings, create them, and fill them up with your mind. And they just don't exist for themselves. You can imagine an alien, and you just fill it up so it can't exist. God managed to create a world where there was a space where we could choose to bring him back in. And because our self brought him back in, the self will still exist. But eventually our free will will end. Free will is a goal, is a means, not an end. Yeah.
Will people die during the Messianic?
So, according to the Rambam, they will. According to, I think everybody holds that at some point in the Messianic era, most likely there'll still be death. According to the Rambam, there'll be a resurrection of the dead, but only as an incredible miracle, so everyone can have a part of this, and then they'll all go back to death and end up in this trans-bodily state. According to the Kabbalistics, no, they'll all be resurrected into the state that is transcendent in this world, but attached to the world still. By the way, on the model I was saying earlier, it's possible they're both true. It's possible there'll be some bodily attachment. Like we'll need something physical to house consciousness in, but it won't be what we'd call today a body. It might be something much more. So it could be they're both right. We'll primarily live in the super spiritual consciousness. So, but that's how they both line up. So certainly early in the Messianic era, there could still be life and death. Still be death and still be things like that. Yeah.
When you say there's going to be no free will,
yeah.
Do you mean that in terms of like following God, because like it would just be so obvious that like, not like you're going to do an Avera, or it's like you won't have like a personality or something?
So, but you won't, it'll be completely following God. So yes, the first one you're saying definitely true. The second one won't be you don't have a personality. It'll be something so transcendent. Our vocabulary now can't really capture it. And this is the point that Rambam's saying. Imagine that a human being somehow is punished, that her brain fragments into being millions of ants. And the job of those ants is to come back together and become a human being again. And now the ants are saying, but when we do that, will it be good? Like, will we still have our ant personalities? Like, will we still be able to eat good mud? You know, like at some point you say, guys, you know, get into that state, you'll see it's a million times better. So it's very hard for us to use our concepts, like words like personality, when we are achieving, when we're in the pure state of perfection, of oneness and complete infinitude, complete connection to God. Whatever we can imagine being good is like limited by this tiny little fragment stuck in this little thing. And that will be infinitely better. So we might lose some of what this personality is about, but what we'll have is something infinitely superior to it. And we will all be parts of it. Everyone who lived, so the collective will all be there, and every individual life that generated it, with its own unique personas and challenges and everything, will be there as a part of it. But anyone who lived an individual life against it won't have the individual self, just the collective self will be there. Okay, yeah.
What role will Goyim play?
What role do the nations play? The nations are a critical part. Look at Zephaniah chapter 3, look at Yeshayahu already from the second chapter. The Loisa Goyal Goy Cherev, nation won't lift up sword against nation, none shall they learn any more war. Now you will see some contradictions, especially when you get into the Kabbalistic zone, that sound like contradictions. Because sometimes they talk about all the nations of the world being part of this, and sometimes they only talk about Israel. But it's actually not a contradiction at all. The reason is that in the beginning there'll be lots of national identities. All the nations will be like united nations all coming together to Hashem. But by the end, it will all dissolve into a singular thing that we'll either call Adam or Israel, and everyone will be a part of. And there won't be separate national identities at that point.
So they're not going to have this physical, like, are they going to still be stuck in physicality?
As much as we are. As much as we are. To the extent to which we're all transcendent, they will presumably be as well. So, and also when we use the word goy, what we sometimes mean is an individual non-Jewish person, and sometimes we mean the nation as a national entity. And that's why the point, you'll see the contradictions back and forth. So my understanding, I'm not saying this is the only, my understanding of it is that in the beginning there'll be all the separate national identities and different groups, each bringing their gifts to God. And because, for example, it talks explicitly in Zephaniah about groups coming from Africa. There's lots of different visions. Sometimes it talks about people coming from the north. There'll be all the different nationalities coming to God, but at some point the separate national distinctions fade and it becomes a oneness called Israel or a oneness called Adam.
Are they going to be able to convert? It's going to be so clear.
So conversion, it seems, up to a certain point, yes, from a certain point they'll stop being conversion in the technical sense. But remember, not everyone needs to be a convert to Judaism to have a place in the world to come. Chasidim Olam, the righteous among the Gentiles, have it according to the Gemara Sanhedrin, which we paskin, that so everyone can. Exactly what percentage of the non-Jewish nations do or don't, and exactly what percentage of the Jewish nation does or doesn't, that's God's decision. We don't know the answer to that. We do know that there will be immense respect for Israel at that time, and for the blessing that hopefully if we've achieved our purpose will have brought blessing to the whole world. Remember, the very first thing God said to Avram is, "V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpei Adama." Through you must be blessed all the nations of earth. And last week, Sedra, when after the Akedah, and after Yitzchak is removed from being bound on the altar, and God reiterates the promise, he says the same thing, that through Yitzchak will be blessed all the nations of earth. So our job is to be blessing all the nations of the earth. Our primary way of doing it is by keeping the Torah properly, right? But in the end, that brings bracha to all the nations on earth. So that is a Messianic thing, right? That hasn't come fully true. Maybe we've given some blessing, but that is clearly an end of history goal, that all families of earth will be blessed through us. So they have to be in the Messianic era, right? Again, and then eventually we all become this one thing called Israel. They will come, there's the Gemara about in Zechariah, the prophecy in Zechariah about all the nations coming to say, I want to learn from you. There's going to be different things, but and we have to make sure we're ready to play those sorts of roles, right? We can't get ourselves so lost that the world's anti-Semitic and reflect people's hatred back on them. You know, if you're going to be a person who's going to be like a priest or a teacher for the world, you have to be what a good student would be, very connected to the information you've got, in this case, God himself, and very much loving and willing to teach everything and value everything out there, everyone out there, and so on. Yeah.
This also has a little bit to do with what we talked about last time. If there's, let's say, like a machlokas in the Gemara or something about something that's going to happen in like the next world or something like that, like Hashem will do, not in the physical world, and they go whatever, there's a machlokas and they go according to one side.
Yeah.
Would that affect what actually happens in Shemayim? Like, does that like change how Hashem does things?
It's a great question. There seems to be, there are those, you literally have this whole debate about whether if the rabbis argue a certain way about, let's say, Treifus, does it change the nature of things? You literally have people who claim the Chazon Ish said yes, and people who claim no Wakelu said yes, and you have lots of different views on this. The best answer I've ever seen is let's wait and see. And it would not surprise me if the answer is, because what does it mean they argue? It means God talks, but God doesn't talk. God talks in a way, sometimes the words are extremely clear, like don't eat a camel, black and white in the Torah, you don't need any interpretation of it. Sometimes he talks in a way that fragments into multiple possibilities. It's like a quantum superposition, and which one you observe or connect to, that becomes the reality. So it may well be that there is a reality shaped in the dialogue between man and God. It's also possible that even though we debate it now and our way of relating to it now is one way, when we get there, we'll see things that we think currently are contradictions somehow become resolved. Okay, we are out of time. I didn't manage to finish all the questions on the Messianic era, so maybe we'll carry on some of them next week, unless you vote on you want to learn something, do something else next week. But hopefully this has been value, and please God, we should live the lives that are so fulfilling of what Hashem wants us to do, that we live to see the Messianic era speedily.